Our topic for this panel today is the new law firm competitor, in-house counsel. It's a fairly provocative topic, at least in the title. As a news organization, we're not at all used to provocation, of course. And we don't offer it as a question, but rather as a statement of fact. Of course, it isn't that simple. And the answer very much depends on your perspective. On this panel today, we're going to get the perspective of in-house legal department leaders. And it's an all-star panel cutting across multiple industries. First, I'd like to introduce my co-panelists. The full bios and photos, in which we all look at least 10 years younger, are in your program. So I'm not going to read for everybody everything that's in their bio, which are quite impressive. Sabine Chalmers is the Chief Legal and Corporate Affairs Officer at Anheuser-Busch InBev, where she's responsible for, among other things, leading the company's legal affairs, compliance, media relations, government affairs, and corporate social responsibility programs. Michelle Coleman-Mays is Vice President and General Counsel at the New York Public Library. Prior to joining the New York Public Library in 2012, Michelle was Executive Vice President and General Counsel of Allstate. Michelle is also a former Assistant U.S. Attorney and Chief of the U.S. Attorney's Civil Division in Detroit. Krista Dalamonte is Senior Vice President and Deputy General Counsel at Viacom, where she oversees the legal department's M&A, transactional, SEC, corporate governance, treasury, and employment practices. Prior to joining Viacom, Krista was a partner and deputy practice group leader of the M&A group at Sherman & Sterling. I actually had an opportunity to work with Krista when Bloomberg acquired Business Week a number of years ago when I was at Wilkie. Our next panelist is May-Lin Quanguet, who's Deputy General Counsel and Head of the Global Litigation Practice at Citi. May-Lin joined Citi this January from my former law firm, Wilkie Farr & Gallagher, where she was a partner and co-head of the firm's white-collar practice. Prior to joining Wilkie, May-Lin was Deputy Chief of the U.S. Attorney's Criminal Division for the Southern District of New York. David Leach is Group Vice President and General Counsel for Ford. Prior to joining Ford, David was Deputy Counsel to President George Bush. David has also served as Chief Counsel for the Federal Aviation Administration. As it turns out, during 9/11, he was also Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the U.S. Department of Justice and was Chair of the Supreme Court Fellows Commission. So we are going to get our panelists' insights on, among other things, the changing expectations and role of in-house counsel, how they decide which work to do internally, how they manage outside counsel, how they decide whether to hire internally, and the nature of the talent that is available to them, which is a very important subject. But before we do so, I wanted to share my own perspective, having made the move relatively recently from being a big law partner to being general counsel of Bloomberg. Until 2012, Bloomberg really was unique probably in having a fairly modestly sized in-house legal department. Senior management at Bloomberg decided really for a number of reasons that it made sense to expand and enhance the internal legal function. From my perspective, I'll choose to believe that the primary reason was not about cost savings, was about increasing sort of our effectiveness in providing legal advice to the company, being more nimble, and adding value. The beginning of 2012, I was one of the 19 lawyers to move from Wilkie to Bloomberg. So I've been at the company now for about 3.5 years, 1,292 days to be precise, but who's counting? It might as well be an entire lifetime. The job of general counsel certainly is not stressless. So I've been on both sides of the discussion fairly recently. Some of my friends at law firms, and I still have a few, although dwindling with each successive fee negotiation, Some of them call me a hypocrite for the views that I'm going to express today and have expressed over the course of the last 3.5 years. I might choose to phrase it a little bit differently, obviously a change in perspective. But frankly, I've been called a lot worse, so I wear that badge with honor. To answer the question of the panel, I can see why someone might conclude that there are elements of competition between in-house counsel and law firms because we both provide legal services, and for certain types of matters, there is clear substitutability between the two. So having said that, a couple of observations. First, there are many things that law firms can't do as effectively as in-house counsel, principally due to physical presence and access to information. For example, proactive risk management. That really has to be driven from the inside. It comes from the attorneys who have contact with the business and other support groups on a daily basis. These are the people who identify the issues, the areas of concern. These are the people who escalate matters before you have a crisis. They observe whether the business is complying with various policies and requirements. And I'm not saying here that in proactive risk management that there isn't a role for outside counsel, because clearly there is. For example, in helping to identify best practices, because they've advised many different clients. But the hardcore work on proactive risk management must be done from the inside. Growing a legal function by hiring more lawyers to support a business unit or subject matter experts will inevitably result in identifying issues that nobody was previously aware of. And for all of us, and I don't want to speak for all of us, but I think for all of us, really, there is no such thing as blissful ignorance. You want to know what is happening. So hiring more people to make sure you're aware of what's going on in your organization is not something you would rely on a law firm for. Ultimately, it could result in more law firm consults because the more issues you have, the more opportunity for consultation. It likely won't result in less spend on outside counsel with the following exception. The fewer big issues that come up, the fewer crises you have, the fewer lawsuits you have, obviously the less you're going to spend on outside counsel, but that's a good thing. Another area where I think really outside counsel is not a substitute for having really strong internal legal function is in dealing with crisis-type situations or potential crises. Law firm partners, well, some of them might, I should rephrase this, but most law firm partners are not sitting at their desk waiting for the phone to ring from their client. They're off servicing other clients. When an issue comes up in today's day and age with social media, things can move pretty quickly. You need to have an internal team, a strong internal team that's capable of being nimble, thoughtful, and available to get together quickly to address these issues. But in order to do that, you really need to have strong talent. If you don't have strong talent, and this is the case across every different type of matter, you will find yourself going to outside counsel because they do. So in-house counsel can actually compete with law firms, subject to the caveat that you have to have access to the requisite talent to do so. I think most of the GCs here today place a high premium on quality lawyering when it comes to managing legal risk. So if we don't have high-level talent, we can't perform some of the functions that I mentioned earlier. You would need to go to outside counsel. If you don't have access to high-level talent and expertise, there are more issues where you will undoubtedly need to go outside, or you will need to go certainly more quickly. Although one might reach a conclusion that we compete in certain respects, and for example, there are many things at Bloomberg today in-house that we do that we previously outsourced to outside counsel, we generally don't view law firms as competitors. Having said that, we want to do as much as we reasonably can internally where we have the expertise, and really who wouldn't. Wall Street firms charge close to $700 an hour on an undiscounted basis for the time of a third-year associate. And I know everybody in the room understands that, but I just want to pause there for a second. $700 an hour for somebody who is 2 years out of law school. You can multiply that out by 2,000 hours in a year, and you get a sense of how much you're paying for the time of that relatively junior lawyer. We can hire somebody who's much more experienced than that, who can learn the business and provide much more value, obviously, for a fraction of the price. But we need firms to partner with us where we don't have enough expertise. We need a second opinion on an issue, or we don't realistically have the bandwidth. This isn't competing, it's partnering to provide the best advice to the business. Law firms are also our biggest source of talent. We count on them to teach young attorneys the skills they need to succeed as lawyers, because we really don't have the internal bandwidth to do it effectively. And ultimately, the typical law firm up or out system drives some of the most talented firm lawyers to us. And if that doesn't get them, being a partner at many firms today isn't what it used to be. So no, I don't view law firms as competitors, with a few exceptions, but we do view them as partners, vendors, and like all vendors, we need to have a clear sense of the value we're getting for the services and talent pools. Some law firms will make the mistake of viewing in-house legal departments as competitors because they're losing work. And they may lose some more work, frankly, if they don't get the pricing structure right. And many of them are losing top-level talent to in-house functions. But that is not the right approach for a law firm, to view the in-house function as a competitor. They really want to look at you as a partner and see where they can add value. In my view, law firms face most of their competition from each other and from lower-cost legal service providers. Having said that, some super elite law firms really haven't changed much of their pricing structure over the past 5 years as there's been more pressure. I think, perhaps mistakenly, under the impression that given their prestige, given their expertise, they can get away with charging the rates that they've charged for years, although they've obviously increased quite a bit. Those firms are taking a gamble that they're sufficiently specialized or distinct, and they don't need to play by the same rules as other firms. I think, unfortunately, as a law firm partner, and I don't want to generalize, there is a lack of perspective as to the challenges that we face in-house. And I'll just give sort of a quick example from my own experience coming in-house to Bloomberg. During the period when we were talking to Bloomberg about expanding the internal legal functions, one of the things that they asked us to do was to identify what we thought the potential savings were from building the in-house legal function. Obviously, that results from reducing outside spend, but obviously you have to take into account the cost of building the internal function. At the same time, the company was doing its own analysis. And I'd just like to ask a question, sort of show of hands. We'll start out first. Who thinks that I had a sort of a greater sense of what the savings were than Bloomberg? Who thinks that I thought that Bloomberg would save more than Bloomberg thought it would save from internalizing the legal function or expanding? You don't have a lot of faith in me, do you? It's like 3 hands. So I'm going to assume that the rest of the room assumes that the company had a more accurate estimate. And you would be right. The company, in fact, did have a more accurate estimate. The principal failing in our analysis was, although we ran all the numbers, we looked at the hours of the people who were coming over, simple enough to do that, and the cost of bringing the team over, we failed to fully take into account the efficiency benefits that would come from having recent law firm lawyers manage law firms. We thought we were doing a pretty good job for Bloomberg when we were at Wilkie, because we always focused on efficiency. But the reality is, no matter how much you think you're doing a good job, there are lots of things that you're doing that are not efficient, and then when the client gets the bill, they'll end up questioning or potentially growing resentful. So over the course of the last 3.5 years at Bloomberg, the internal legal function has grown from 18 lawyers globally to approximately 80, with expertise across virtually every legal discipline. And I think, I don't want to speak for management, we have achieved many of the sort of savings projections, but also, as some of our speakers have alluded to this morning, the value of having lawyers internally who really understand the business and can provide creative and pragmatic advice and also act quickly, I think certainly has helped on the business side as well.